Hello everyone and welcome to this video for PROG1198. Today's topic is sublists and using sublists to represent table relationships in your database data. So let's get started. So our goal is we want to represent a parent-child relationship between records in a relational database. In the example that we've been doing, we have departments and employees in a one-to-many relationship so that one department can have many employees, but each employee has just one department. Just as a side note, you can represent other types of relationships using this type of framework as well. We're just sticking with one-to-many because it matches what we've been working with for the rest of the example, and also because it's fairly straightforward and the most simple. But you can take what you learned from this video and extend it to things like many-to-many relationships or one-to-many recursives as well. So our goal is we want to make it so that a department object in our application contains a reference to all of its employees, kind of like we were performing a join, but we don't actually have to perform a join in order to create a relationship like this. So we're working with this foreign key relationship in the database. Just as a refresher, I will open up our department and employee databases. Or database tables rather. So we're using the company database, and when I execute these two queries, we can see that we've got departments here and employees there, and department code is the foreign key. So what we're looking at is when we retrieve data about one department, say for example, the accounting department, we also want to retrieve the employees that are a part of this department. So we're going to be looking at two data sets where we have the same department code for both. And when we create this object representing the accounting department, it's going to contain within it a list of all these employee objects. So the database is already set up for this. The tables have that relationship in them, so we can move right along to fixing up our code library or our data layer. So our first step is going to be adding a property or a field that will represent that list of child objects. So if we look at our existing department class, we have properties or fields for department code, department name, and department budget. And we're going to add an additional one called employees that is a list of employee objects. Now, we don't want to be able to assign new employees to a department via this way. We know that when we assign new employees, we're going to have to do it through the employee class where we're either updating or inserting new records. So we can't just create new employees on the fly. So we want to omit the set block because of that. And we only want to have a get block so we can read what employees are part of the department, but we don't want to be able to change that just yet. Now that's something that we could consider extending to in the future, but we're not going to go there today. One thing that we do need to do though is to ensure that when a department gets created, the list gets created as well. So because there's no set block, we're going to include a constructor call that will set up the list as being a new empty list if we can't assign a new list. So we're going to start it as empty. Then later when we retrieve the employees that are part of this department, we can just add them to the list that already exists. So in the future, what we might want to consider doing is creating some kind of dynamic editing interface where you can select a department, you're provided with a list of employees, maybe you could make some changes to a bunch of employees too, and when you click save, it goes through the employees, saves all of them, goes through the department, and saves any changes to the department. That's a bit more complex than what we're going to handle in this class, but it's just something to think about, or if you're looking at extending your skills or practicing or trying something new, that could be one thing that you might be interested to try. So for our project, we're going to be adding this list of employees to our department class. We're writing a get block, but not a set block. And we're setting this thing up as a new list. So when the department gets created, we don't need to provide a list of employees right away. This also prevents it from trying to write it directly when we read our database information via that query method. So now our department has a list of employees. Our next step is to add a new method to our data layer. We want to add a method that creates the list of employees as part of retrieving a department object. So the way that we do this is we need to use both of these SQL statements, finding the department object and then finding the related employees for that department. Because we have two SQL statements, instead of sending one query, we're going to execute a method called query multiple instead. And because our query provides more than one result set, instead of just storing it as one result collection, we're storing it in an object called grid reader. From the grid reader, we're going to first read the first result, and this is only going to be one record, so we can read it as a single record. And then after that, we're going to read the rest of the results as a list. Once we have that list, we can take all the elements in the list and add it to our employees list collection in the department class. So let's take a look at what that might look like. We write a new method. It still takes a department code. It's very similar to the one where it found a department by a department code. The only difference is now it's going to find the department and find all the employees too. So here's our two SQL statements. Both of them use the same department code parameter, just like we did in our SQL statement here. We have the same department code. We're going to pass that SQL queries, both of them, to a query multiple call. And one thing I want to point out that when you have two separate queries, or when you're going on to the next line, even within one query, make sure that you have a space. There's a space right here between the end of department code and the start of the select query. And if there's not a space there, then when you send this over to the database as the query text, it looks like your variable is called @deptCodeSelect. It sticks them right together. So it's important to remember your spacing there, that we have sending this as two separate queries. We're storing it in this variable. I've named it all results. It is a grid reader, but I've used the more general just var to store that rather than creating a new using statement and importing a whole new library file. I'm just simplifying that by using var. These two lines are used to read. First, we're reading one single result that comes from the first SQL statement, and we store that as a department. Then we read the rest of the results as a list and store that as a list of employees. Then, assuming both items worked correctly, we take that list of employees and add it to the employee list as part of the department. So let's drop this code into our project. This is our original get department by department code method. You'll notice in the previous video we switched it over to using a stored procedure, but if we look at the original SQL statement, that's the same as what we're using now. Now, in the future, you might want to change over and use a stored procedure instead of writing two inline select statements, and you absolutely can do that. But in this example, we're going to stick with the straightforward SQL. Now, we follow this same pattern where we define the SQL statement, we send the query, and then we return the department object. I'll just pause while I type. So I'm partway through typing this. I haven't put in the SQL statements yet, but I did want to point out some of the differences between what we've done before and what we've done now. The main difference is that when we're calling query multiple, we're not specifying any data type. And the reason is because our SQL code is actually going to be two different statements. I'll just paste those in here now so we can look a little bit more closely at them. So because we have two statements, we're not storing it as a department or as an employee. We're storing it as this generic var, which is a grid reader object. And you can read this here. The grid reader provides interfaces for reading multiple result sets from a query. So we have two result sets. So we can't assign them, this is all a department or this is all an employee. We're just storing them in a grid reader. Then when we read from the grid reader, that is when we actually store them as an object. So we're reading the first result, and we are reading just one record because the department code here is the primary key, so there's only ever going to be one department that matches. So we read the one department and store it in the department object just like before. So this is a two-step process now, whereas in the previous one, when we could call query, we could read the entire result as a department object. Now this is a little bit more complex with query multiple. So we've read the first one. Now we want to move on to the next one. And the next one is going to be a list of employee objects. I'll just store them temporarily in this thing called emps. And we're going to go to all results.read, but this time we're reading employee records. And there's going to be more than one of them, so we're going to use toList. So we read all the employees in the second grid of the grid results, and we're going to convert them to a list and store them right in here. Now we need to say that this list of employees belongs in the department. And the department now has this employees object. But if we try to say something like this, dept.employees equals emps, you'll see that we can't assign to it. So what we want to do instead, we don't want to provide a set block, because then when we try to read a department, it's going to try to set that for us, and the data that we need won't be there, right? When we read a department object, it uses those set blocks to set these three other properties. So we can't put a set block here without really causing a lot of extra headaches for ourselves in other places. But we know that we have that empty list, so we're going to use add range and add the employees that way. So we retrieve the existing list, which is empty, and add these new employees to it that way. Now we have to be careful here. If we try to do this and the list of employees is empty, then that's going to cause a problem for us. If we try to do this and the department wasn't found, it's also going to cause a problem. So I'm going to put in a little if statement here that says if the department is not null and the employee is not null, then we're going to assign. Otherwise, we're just not going to even try to do this. Well, if we have a null list of employees, then we're going to bypass that and just return the department as is with the empty list. So that completes our getDepartmentWithEmployees method. So now we can call on this, provide a department code, get all the department information, including the list of employees. So it can be used as a replacement in place of getDepartmentByDepCode. So where is that used in our project? We want to implement it anytime we retrieve a department object given a specific department code, then we want to use this new method as opposed to the older one. So I'm going to go into our user interface. We were working on this main page. This is where we had our list of departments. And we used this text box and search button where we could type in a department code and view the name of the given department. So that is where we pulled up one individual department. And that's what the method that we just wrote does. It doesn't give us a whole list of departments. It gives us one department with its employees. So when I go to the event handler for this search button, You can see that we used to call our get department by department code. Instead of doing that, just to test out our new method, I'm going to instead call the method that we just wrote, which is get department with employees. So if we call on get department with employees, the department name will still show up in that label, but we want to demonstrate that not only do we have the department information, but we also have a lot of employee information. So we could put, somewhere on this page, maybe over here, we could, when a department is searched for, we can see a list of that department's employees. Rather than go through another demonstration of how to data bind a list to some kind of view object, we've already done that before. So I'm not going to replace that. I just am going to prove that we do have access to that list by showing its contents in a message dialog. So we can say, I'm going to create a content string, and for each employee in department.employees. So we have this department object that we retrieved. It has a list of employees, and for every employee in the list, I'm going to put that employee's name into the string content. So we'll do first name and a space and a last name. And a new line character. Once the loop of employees is done, I'm just going to display it in a message dialog. Oops. There we go. So let's run this and make sure that it's working correctly. Before we do that though, just as a quick refresher, if we put in accounting, the names that we should see are listed here. So we have Marissa Green, Lisa Millette, and Miles Franklin. Let's run our project and make sure that if we type in the accounting into the box and search for it, that we'll see those three names coming out. So here's my app. We will type in ACCT to represent the accounting department. When I click search, you can see that those three names are coming out into our message box, which proves that we are able to retrieve a list of employees as part of the department object. So we can see that for every different department, we're getting a list of associated employees. And if we put in a department that doesn't have any employees attached, you can see that there's our empty list. So we're successfully able to get a list of employees and store them as part of the department object. Just as a mild detour, I wanted to indicate that there are other ways to concatenate and loop. I know in the C# course we've been studying link, so I wanted to kind of give a demonstration as to how we could create something like that instead in the link environment here. When we have a collection, in this case the collection is called department.employees. If I wanted to get the first and last name concatenated together, what I can do is I can take my department.employees and I'm going to select. So given a particular employee, I want to take the employee emp first and a space and the emp last. So that's going to create a collection of those employee first and last names with a space in between. So select is going to make, in this case, a list of strings, or an IEnumerable of strings. Now, we could also create these things in an array or in a list. If I say toArray, now I'm getting an array of strings. And if we think way back when we learned first about arrays and string methods and things that we can do, one very common thing that we can do is string.join, where we can provide a separator. In this case, I want to separate the names with new line characters and the array. Now the array is this giant thing, so we'll just move that into there. I need a semicolon at the end of my line. This is my content string. So rather than doing a loop, we can put all of the content into a joined string using link and select query syntax. Just a different way of accomplishing the same thing. I wanted to demonstrate that, a little bit of crossover from our C#. And if we run it, we'll see that we get the same output. So the point of this isn't how we display it, it's the fact that we can display it, that by retrieving a department, we also get a list of employees. Okay, so what about when we want to retrieve all of the departments? We had a department list method. Let's take a look at it in here. That gets all of the departments. It's a very simple method that just performs select all from department, reads the entire list into a list of departments. But nowhere in here does it set up the list of employees for each department. Now, there's a few different schools of thoughts on how we can handle this. We can perform a join and then pull it apart. We can use a loop to select each department and then its employees individually. There's lots of different ways that we can solve this problem. But the way that I've chosen to demonstrate, and it's not necessarily the best way or the only way, it's just a way, is once we get our list of departments, we can call on something that we already have to provide a list of related employees. So this is a bit of a different method than from what I did before. What the previous example was querying the database with query multiple. But in this case, I'm going to do it something different so you can see two different approaches to this problem. So we have a list of departments, but every department at this point has an empty employees list. We have a method down here that will allow us to select employees based on some criteria. And one of the criteria is the department code. If we call upon this filter method and pass it a department code, it returns to us a list of employees for that department, which is exactly what we want to store. So rather than dealing with more complex SQL statements and trying to pull apart results out of grid readers, when we're doing multiple departments, that can get a little bit hairy. So I'm going to use our existing filter employees method. And I'm going to say for each department D in this list. So this list is a list of departments. And for every department in the list, I'm going to set my employees and I'm going to add a range. So this is similar to how we did it above, right? We added a range when we had a list of employees to add. We want to do the same thing here. We need a list of employees to add. So I'm going to call on filter employees. And when we call that method, we're going to add that range of employees. Now, if I call it without any parameters, we know that it just finds everyone. So I want to call it with a parameter and pass the department code. So I'm going to pass the department code for this current employee object. But we have to also pass parameters for the name and the date range. Now I don't want to filter these by name and date. I want all the employees for this particular department code. This is going to return for us a list of employees in that department, and then that list is going to be assigned to the department object. So that's an easy way to use what we already have, to call upon our stored procedure, which we know is already efficient, and populate multiple department lists at once. Now, to test it, when we call on get all departments, let's go to that implementation. When do we call on get all departments? Well, we call on it when we want to populate that list into the list view. So that happens actually right as the page loads up, but it also happens again every time an edit is made to the departments. So here it is. When we load the data, we're calling get all departments. The method call doesn't change. We're still calling that same method. I didn't make a new one this time. I just edited what was already there. So when we call get all departments, the departments are assigned as the data source of the list view. And we can go in here and use a similar method that I did before to prove that we have a list of departments. So I'm going to do something similar to what I did before and just put up a list of employees for each department. So I'm going to make a for each loop. And for every department, I'm going to add on the department name and a new line character. And then I'm going to do that string.join again to get a list of employees in that particular department. I'll just pause while I type it. Just to simplify things, I just took the first name this time rather than the first comma last. So for every department, I'm just going to get some brackets around this. For every department, we're going to add the department name and then a joined string of all the employees in that department. And I'm going to put a couple of new lines between this one and the next one. And then we'll just show this in a message dialog again. So when the page first loads or when any changes are made, we'll get this little pop-up showing us departments and the list of employees just to prove that it works when we get every department at once. So my page loaded up. The dialog box just showed up on my other screen, but you can see it when I move it over. This is the dialog indicating the department name and the list of employees in each one. So it works when we get all the departments now as well. And anytime I make any changes, for example, if I try to update the department budget here, every time this reloads, you'll see that that happens again. So when we get all of the departments, each one is getting assigned its own unique list of employees. And then what we do with that after, that is up to you and your imagination. So that sums up our lesson about getting complete data sets where we have a list of parent objects and each individual parent instance has its own sublist of all of the child objects. And from there, you might consider doing something else like providing a more interactive user interface. For example, one thing that we might consider doing is modifying the event handler on our list view so that when you select a particular department, maybe it provides you a list of employees, or maybe it takes you to another page or another part of the application that allows you to view more detailed information about those employees. So there's really no limit to what you can do once you have a powerful data set like this. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video and that you learned a lot. If you have any questions or concerns or anything like that, please just send me an email or drop into any of our Collaborate sessions. And with that, this is the last topic in PROG1198. You've completed the course, so I want to say congratulations, and I hope that you enjoyed the course and that it helps you on your quest to become a better programmer. So I hope you all have a great day.